Hello and welcome back to another one of our step-by-step tutorials. Now last year I started running a back to basic floral design tutorial series where we looked at all the very geometric shapes that are very popular in both British floristry and flower arranging, and they are very formal designs that tend to follow quite set patterns. And I said when I created them that I was using just a very basic selection of flowers so that you could see a really simple step-by-step process on how to create them. And I mentioned that I would revisit each one of these designs later so that you could see how you would progress with those designs and make them a little bit more interesting by adding different types of flowers into them and maybe a few accessories. And really it's just about expanding on those skills that we looked at right at the very beginning. So we started with the line arrangement, or often referred to as a vertical design. And this is quite a simple, elegant type arrangement. And for this style I've picked this is just a simple flower pot that I have here at the studio. And it's a rose gold sort of colour combination. And to go with that, I've chosen some of the birch twigs that you quite often see me use, and these have been sprayed, and it's the closest linking colour that I could get to my container, so it helps to bring a visual link between the top half of the flower arrangement and the bottom section. So these have been dip sprayed, or dip dyed I should say, and they are fantastic as an accessory to keep in your toolbox or in your accessories drawer, because you can use them time and time again. Even though they were fresh material when they were dip dyed, they dry beautifully and you can use them all throughout the year. Then to create some background height and give me the overall shape of my arrangement, I have these lovely green foliage. This is from the Yucca plant. Now it could be a New Zealand flax if you didn't have this type of foliage, but I've been gifted quite a lot of these, and they work fantastically at the back to give me my overall height. And then my foliage is the leatherleaf, which is quite a traditional British florist foliage, I would say. Not only used by British florists, used by lots of florists throughout the world, but if you're training to be a florist, this is when you quite often have available to you in the shop. Then just behind me I have some small Yucca, no they're not Yucca, they're Fatsia. So Fatsia japonica, they have been cut a bit shorter because I've used them in a design previously. But if you're buying them, they come in like this. And these, although we tend to refer to them as Fatsia in the UK, if you're buying these, they are often referred to as a lavalier. So a beautiful palmate leaf, very flat, quite bold, great for this type of arranging. So we have two different types of foliage, and I've selected those because they contrast wonderfully against one another. So you have quite a fussy pointed leaf with the leather leaf, and then you have a much fatter, bolder leaf with very little texture in it, as a contrast against the leather leaf. Now my flower material consists of a wonderful red rose, and this is probably one of my favourite roses. This is called Red Naomi, and it's that really dark red rose. I have removed quite a lot of the guard petals off the outside, and when these open, they take a couple of days of standing in water, but they open into an enormous size head and are really long lasting and a wonderful example of the red rose. And then just to give me a little bit of contrast in texture and shape, I've gone for probably what we would refer to as more of a hot pink colour combination. This is a lovely Gerbera. It has a beautiful spiky leaf, or spiky petal I should say, not a leaf. And I thought the contrast in both the colour and the shape and the texture is really quite good. Now I love hot pinks and cerises and reds together, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And we're currently working on our Valentine's Day collection, so you can see how these two these two flowers are going to work really well together. So that's my flowers. I'll just move those to one side. And then I have a small amount of the green Hypericum, again a little bit of contrast against the red, and to give me an interesting texture, I suppose. It's something a little bit different. We have those very large heads of the red roses and the Gerbera, and this will give us a great texture and a great contrast in shape alongside the very big flowers. So that's my flower and foliage selection. Now I have some floral foam, and I've soaked one whole block, and you'll see that it's probably too big for my container, the size it is here now. If you imagine that we allow this whole section of foam above the container, by the time we've completely covered that, there will be a very massed section at the bottom of the design, and a vertical or a line arrangement needs to be quite simple. So the less floral foam we have showing, the better for our end result and our finished design. So you can do this a few ways. I'm just going to lay the two alongside one another, roughly work out the height of my foam, cut it with a nice sharp scissors, or cut it with a nice sharp knife I should say, not a scissors, and then that will sit quite comfortably into the base. And it is a little bit wobbly, so what I'll do with the remaining part of the foam, I'll just use it almost like a little wedge down there at the side. That'll prevent the foam from moving around. You could of course use some anchor tape over the top, some hot tape, but what I find is that then it gives you more problems with having to cover the floral tape as well as covering the foam, and again it becomes quite excessive with the amount of foliage that you need to cover the base. If you're travelling and you're taking this a long distance, then I would probably recommend you use the tape over the top. But for today's demonstration, I'm just going to leave it with the pieces wedged in on either side. And then I'm going to just remove the edge of the floral foam, and I'm using the sharp knife just to do that process. That gives us a much easier shape to our foam to arrange into. We don't have that very severe right angle on the end, and it makes it a little bit easier to do our side placements. Okay, so I like to start with my flowers. It's not everybody's choice, but I think it's probably the way I was originally trained how to do flower arranging. And I'm going to look for the smaller of the heads. So out of these lovely red Naomi, that would be my smaller head. I've already conditioned them, I've already removed the foliage from the base, and I'm going to take off that leaf as well because it's a little bit unsightly. And I'm going to look to create the design at least twice the height of my container. So if we think about that container on top again, this would be 1 and this would be 2. And I'm used to doing this, so I can pretty much do it by eye. You could always measure with a ruler if you're learning. I often use a piece of string when I'm teaching, and then you double the string and that gives you the height. The more you practice, the more you'll be able to do it by eye. And roughly twice the height. We don't have to be, precise. We don't have to be perfect in our measuring. It's just to ensure that the flowers become the more dominant feature rather than the container itself. And that's quite a standard format in these very traditional shapes. Those rules don't apply in all flower arranging and floristry, but they do in this series of designs that I'm looking at today. So I've arranged straight into the centre of the floral foam. I'm roughly 2/3 back in my foam, so I've allowed space at the back to put some foliage. That will help create some weight and stop my design falling over. It also helps my eye to travel through the design and give it an almost three-dimensional effect rather than a very flat looking design. So that's the taller flower. If I look at it from the side, it is angled back slightly because it's a little bit more pleasing to the eye than it being very severely straight. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to bring my base flower out in line with my top flower, and again I need to look for a smaller head. So the smaller of the roses, and I think it's going to be that one there. These are all quite similar in their sizing. And what you will find when you're learning, or even if you're a little bit more experienced in flower arranging and you buy flowers, you won't always get the option to choose the bigger or the smaller heads. So it's okay for me to be able to explain all the rules and the principles and the theory behind, but when you're at home and you're doing it yourself, this isn't always practical to do. But the reason we do it is because your focal flower needs to be the larger of the flower head. That becomes the more dominant flower and creates a resting place for your eye and somewhere to prevent the design becoming very busy. Now this one is going to come almost in line with my top rose, and the design is narrow, it's a vertical arrangement, so we don't go a great deal wider than that container itself, otherwise it becomes a symmetrical triangle. And I'm angling it up slightly so that it allows me room underneath to place some foliage. And then 2/3 of the way down the arrangement is roughly here, and that is where my larger rose head is going to go, and that's going to create my focal point. Okay, now for beginners I find it easier to place the middle flower in next. So if you can imagine a gap between the top flower and the bottom one, we're looking to create this visual line down through the middle, and I'm going to go slightly off to my left hand side so that we get what's called a rhythmic line. We don't get this very, very severe line down the middle. And hopefully the gap sort of between those two flowers there is very similar, and it allows me room to put my focal rose here and another rose at the top section there to continue that lovely line down through the middle. Now you could of course do this with foliage first. Now this is not quite the bigger of the heads of roses. This is the larger one, which will create my focal point. And if you're a little bit unsure, you can always sit your rose on the head, or sorry, on the top of the foam, roughly work out where you want that stem to go, and that will give you a guide where to cut, and then you can allow yourself an extra inch or two so that you can always make it a little bit shorter if it's too long, and you're allowing enough stem to go into the floral foam. Now at the moment, my stems, my flowers are facing upwards, and as I come forward, we're stepping forward slightly to meet this flower here at the bottom. What you don't want to do is angle everything forward, otherwise the design becomes very front heavy and there's a possibility that it might tip forward. So now we're looking to fill this area in here, this gap between my 3rd rose and my 5th rose. So we're looking to go here somewhere. And again, you can turn your rose upside down as a guide. And I've come backwards and forwards, so we have that nice rhythmic line down through the middle. Makes your eye bounce back and forth and is far more pleasing than a very regular, severe line. And there we are, that's my focal line. So the focal line is used in lots of different styles of both floristry and flower arranging. And once you learn these skills, it's quite easy to create other shapes and other styles once you learn the very basic tips. Okay, so we got that far in our original set of videos. I'm just going to remove that leaf off, and that one too. So we got to that sort of stage before, and we just used carnations to create that vertical line. And what I'm going to do now is add in some of this very vibrant coloured Gerbera. And I need to consider, I have 3, so where those positions are going to sit better. And we'll start with one here towards the top. And what we need to try and do is to start the Gerbera on a different level to our roses, so that we have almost like stepping stones coming down towards the base. I have a gap here where my next Gerbera is going to go, and again I'm looking to start with the smaller flower at the top, working my way down to the larger of the Gerbera at the bottom. Now I haven't support wired the Gerbera. They are a really good quality Gerbera. They've been conditioned properly and we've used the correct flower food for them. So they should hold up without you needing to wire them. But again, if you're learning and you're starting out on your floral journey, then you might want to use a 71 gauged wire just twisted around the outside so that it gives the flower head a little bit of extra support. And again, I think we'll cut a little bit shorter. We're going to try and get that now in between those 2 roses at the base, allowing a little bit of space in between each flower so that it's not too overcrowded. But you see that we have that very lovely rhythmic line of all the different plant materials working its way down to the focal area around here. Okay, so now we get to put some of our foliage in, and the tips of my, I've dropped my scissors. So the tips of the Yucca are a little bit damaged, they're a little bit wind damaged, and I'm just going to cut the end so it's a little bit narrower, so we're taking up less space in the floral foam. And we're going to sit these 2 almost side by side there at the back. Doesn't matter if we go a little bit taller, it doesn't change or spoil the proportions that we looked at the very beginning. And this one needs to be a little bit shorter than our first leaf. So again, we have that step-in effect created. And they're almost parallel against one another. What we're not doing with this style of arrangement is fanning them out and making a radial placement of our stems. They are almost parallel to one another. Then I also have this gorgeous twig, which I'm going to place in to continue that lovely colour through from the base. So again, I've gone a little bit higher so that each material is finishing at a different level. We don't want everything finishing at the same line because it gives you a very visual stop. We need everything to disappear off into the distance. And I'll use some a little bit lower down. So again, we're bringing the colour all the way down to the base. So now we look at putting a contrasting material in, and we're going to look at using the wonderfully coloured green Hypericum berry. And these are going to stay quite short, quite low, almost contained within the focal area here at the bottom. Does 2 things: help to cover my floral foam and also brings in another texture and another colour. And this is fantastic against the gorgeous red shades. Again, nice and low down. And then we can come at this point to think about adding in our foliage. And we don't need to go too wide in this area here, otherwise the design, as I explained, now becomes a triangle rather than vertical line. And I'm going to start with the lavalier. So this is the very much commercially available florist type foliage. I'm thinking that possibly my fascia might be too large for this type of design, but we'll see as we go through. And I'm going to cut very small pieces and start angling them down from the top. So we're looking now to give our design some widths, so side placements, and it's a symmetrical design, so we need to go the same width on either side. And then I need to do exactly the same at the front. I need to bring a little bit of the foliage out towards the front, and this will give me my overall shape and my overall dimensions. And quite quickly, my floral foam here at the front is covering up, and we have some interesting textures. I possibly don't need to have any larger leaves here, otherwise the design is going to become quite wide. And if I just turn that round while I finish in the back. So we need to remember at the back to bring the foliage out roughly the same depth as we do at the front. This will aid balance, it'll stop the design from falling forward, and it also gives us some depth, makes your eye travel through towards the back, and stops that very two-dimensional look. I think when you're learning, sometimes you try very hard to create straight lines and patterns, and you forget sometimes that the arrangement needs to look realistic and needs to have the eye moving from the front to the back and from one side to the other. And we're nearly done there with the leather leaf. I'll just show you what happens if I put the fascia leaf in. So we are still quite narrow with our foliage placements. We haven't lost that overall vertical or line look that we're trying to create. The wider we go here at the side, the more of a triangle shape we start to create. So I'll just show you with the smaller of the leaves. If I just place these in on one side, you'll see how visually heavy that is, and it almost makes it a triangle. For me, that is far too wide. So even though at the beginning I thought they would be a good choice of material for its textural quality, for me they are far too large. So we'll just use the leather leaf there at the base to create coverage of our floral foam. It gives us a visual link with the green foliage at the back as well, and finishes off the base, helping our eye to travel through from the front towards the back, so the design has depth and a three-dimensional quality. And I think overall we have a really interesting design. So it's the next step from the basic design that we learnt in our first set of videos. And again, try with the vertical design like this to use individual flower types. You can use delphiniums to create the line at the back, or stock depending on the time of the year. But big round flowers are far better suited for this style of arrangement than spray chrysanthemums or spray carnations and that type of thing. And then you can just play around, add in a little bit of extra textural material, some larger or smaller leaves. And what I also have is these Pepe Cones, and this will help again give me a visual link between the copper, rose gold sort of tints of the birch twigs at the top, and help bring that colour all the way down to the bottom. Just remove that for a second. And these have been wired just onto a 90 gauge wire, so they're nice and secure and they will hold up in the arrangement. And there we have it, another interpretation of a line. So this is now the next stage you can go to when you're practicing your floral design at home. So many thanks for watching. Please leave a comment or like, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do, because it helps other people find the videos. And we'll be back very soon with some more floral designs for you to learn. Bye for now.